Welcome to the Pot Limit Omaha lesson. Now, a lot of you have dealt it, some of you haven't, maybe some of you even have a little bit of trouble with it. So after this video, we're going to make sure that you understand the procedure of pot limit and kind of tips on how to get the math a little quicker than you're used to and what's important in dealing pot limit. So here I'm going to have, do 25, 50 blinds. I'm going to deal everybody 4 cards because in any Omaha game, 4 cards are dealt. We're going to be doing Omaha pot limit high only for this lesson. Okay, so you have your blinds out and you're going to the next player. It's very important to know what the minimum and the maximum that a player can bet. So obviously, if you are going to this next player and the blinds are 25, 50, the minimum raise that this player can make is 100, which is double of what the big blind is. But here's where the pot limit comes into play, which is the maximum. You take the biggest bet. Now in this case, the big blind is 50, so that's the biggest bet, and you times it by 3, and then you add the small blind. Now, there is a difference between tournament and cash play. In tournament play, you use the true number. For example, if this player wanted to pot it, it would be 3 times 50 plus 25, because that's the true number. So the bet would be 175. However, in a cash game, you do an assumed number, meaning that you assume that the small blind is 50 as well, that they're calling the bet. So the number would be 200. So once again, it's very important to note that in tournaments, it's the true number, and cash games, it is the assumed number. Now, you say, well, how come you're multiplying that times 3? That doesn't make any sense to me, because if I look at that, it just looks like 75 is the pot, right? Well, I'm going to show you how they come to that conclusion. If a player is to bet pot, which is the maximum, the formula includes a called bet, which would be 50. Then you add 50, 100, 125 on top of that, and that's how you get to 175. Now that's kind of a long process to go through when you're coming up with numbers. So if you multiply the last bet times 3 and add that, you come up with the same number, and it's a lot quicker. So we are going to do the true number, like tournaments that you're going to be doing, and then maybe I'll do an example of the assumed number. So the next player here, his minimum raise in this situation would be, what's the difference between 175 and 50 is 1 1/4, right? So you add 1 1/4 on top of this bet, which would make it 300. That's how you get the minimum bet. The maximum bet, however, is the biggest bet on the table, just like I said before, times 3, so you have 175. So now if you have trouble multiplying 175 times 3, here's a trick. Bring it up to 200. 200 times 3 is easy, right? 600. But don't forget, since it's only 175, it's 25 less. So you have to subtract 25, 25, and 25. So the number would be 525. So that's how you get it, times 3. But you can play around, whatever works easiest. For me, when I'm doing my math, that's a lot easier for me to multiply, to bring a kind of an awkward number bet up to a, like for example, 175 to 200, because 200 times 3 is 600, subtract 75, 525, right? Then you have to add the 50 and the 25 on top of this bet, so this would be the total bet, which is 600. 525 plus 75, 600 is the absolute max. Now the reason why it's important for you to be able to do math and to know what somebody's max bet is because you're dealing pot limit, and a player is not allowed to bet above the pot. This is the absolute max. It's different than no limit, because in no limit a player can bet everything in front of him, but pot limit is only up to the pot. So say this player folds, remember, going to drag your hands in as so. So this player drags it as so, and this player calls, let's say it's $600. Very important, when you're looking at a player that is putting in a bet, you must verify and make sure that the correct bet is out. Because in this case, see, this guy only has 500. Do not move to the next player until you have verified that, sir, you owe another 100. A lot of dealer mistakes happen because they don't verify bets. So once you see that the bet is correct, you go to the next player. So make sure he puts in 600. If he puts it in as so, you as a dealer must spread it to make sure that 600 is there. Say this player mucks. Not everybody's going to call a $600 bet. Say this player mucks. Very important in pot limit when you are dragging in dead money. This is part of your pot total, okay? So say this player folds 2. Now you have 75 dead money in here. Now, what if it comes back to this player and he says pot? This is very important because he has chips in front of him. What you do is you go to the biggest bet. Okay, it's 600, right? You times it by 3. Now you can do it in 2 ways. You can take this bet times 3 and then add this and add this and add this. No, you will not be adding his bet. When somebody bets pot and pot limit and they have chips in front of them, you are to ignore what is ever in front of them, and it does not become part of the total of the pot. So you can either times this by 3, add this, add this, add this, which takes a minute or so, or I got another tip for you. If these 3 bets are the same, instead of multiplying this times 3, multiply it times 3 times 4 times 5. 600 times 5 is 3,000 plus 75 is 3,075. So that made it easier to multiply, times 3, then add and add and add. That takes a little bit longer, but if you see the bets are the same, you can multiply it by 6 in this example. So I would say 3075, sir, right? So he would either call or fold. Now, it's also important to note, I'm just using this as an example, this player could possibly bet the pot because he has chips less in the pot, so you would just say, sir, that's going to put you all in, rather than doing the multiplication. So be aware when somebody's saying pot, if they're actually going to be able to achieve that amount. So let's just, for example, say he folds, so you bring this in. Now, very important in pot limit, the most important part that you need to know is before you drag all the remaining bets in, you must take a calculation and add the pot, because that's what makes you a pot limit dealer, is knowing what's in the pot. So in this example, we have 600 times 3, 1,800. We've got a black, 1,900, 2,000, 2050. You are never to announce this amount out to the table. You are to do all of this in your head. The only reason I'm doing it out loud is because I'm giving you a lesson. So once you have that number, say it in your head a couple of times because you can't forget it. You must always know what the pot total is. So drag in the bets, keeping your left hand flat. Keep your pot where it belongs on the left side of the table as we've showed you. Burn. Do your flop. Now, if a player says to you, pot, you're going to tell them 2050. If a player wants to bet the minimum, it should always be whatever the big blind is. So in that case, the blind was 2050. He has to at least bet 50, and he has to bet, or he can bet all the way up to 2050. Very important to note too that depending on the color of the blind. So in this case, we're playing a green chip game. He has to bet in increments of 25. He can't bet 55, or he can't go all in. He can only bet in increments of 25, whatever the big blind is. If you're dealing a pot limit red chip game, it has to be in increments of 5. Now, let's say he bets 200. Normally they would bet bigger when the pot is this size, but now this player's options would be obviously to fold, call the 200. He could double the bet. He could make it 400, he can make it 500, 600, all the way up to the pot. But say, for example, he says pot. Immediately I would look at him and I would say, sir, that would put you all in because he couldn't cover it. However, this is a math exercise as well. So if he says pot, you're not going to be multiplying this times 3, only the last big bet. Now in this case, there's only one bet on the table of 200. You'll multiply that times 3, which is 600, and then add it to your number. So you're at 2650. The most important thing you need to know as a pot limit dealer is never losing sight of what your main pot is, okay? So let's just say for this example, he decided to raise it to 400. Let's say this player over here went all in for 100, okay? This is another important part of the lesson. Now, you would announce to the table all in for less, right? Because it's less than what the bet is. And then you would go to the player still with chips. Sir, it's $200 more to call. So say he calls. Now, I can't stress enough in pot limit, when you have an all-in player, that's the last thing you need to focus with. The most important thing you need to pay attention to is calculating your pot before you even deal with the all-in. So, we're at
2050
plus 800 plus another 100. Now we're at
2950.
Say that in your head a couple times because you can't forget that total, because these two players are not all in and can still bet the pot. Once you have that number, then address the all-in. Okay, I have an all-in for 100. Take that into the pot, and what I usually do is show that I'm taking the correct bet before I drag it in the pot. And I also make an arrow to the all-in, just like you do in no-limit games. Then I would take the rest of this and I would put it into my first side pot. Now, sir, you are eligible to win this pot. The two remaining players can win both, and then you continue on with the hand. Go to this player. If he says pot, obviously we'd have to remember what the pot total was to tell him. In this case, he can't bet it, but just let's just say he checked and he checked. Sorry. River, drop the deck. Check, check. Tell the all-in to hold his hand. You two show me a winner. So they turn over their cards or they don't. You're never going to physically turn over a player's cards, by the way. That's absolutely forbidden. If they don't turn it over themselves, then, just say, sir, are you mucking your hand? But you were never allowed to touch another player's cards. I'm just doing this because nobody's sitting at the table. So he turns over his hands and then you read them out loud. Now, also, very important to note, you are not allowed to spread a player's hand either. If you can't read the hand, sir, can you spread your cards for me? So he spreads some cards and then you read the cards. Okay, he's got a pair of fives with an ace jack. This player has two pair, aces and fives. Kill the losing hand. Remember, you're allowed to pick this up because you're killing it. Then you award the side pot, clearing your hands. Now you go to the all-in. Can you beat this? Not show me your hand. That's a no-no. Sir, can you beat that hand? So he turns over his hand, and sure enough, he cannot. He's got eights and fives in this example. Normally, when they can't beat the hand, they're not going to turn it over. This is just an exercise, and I wasn't psychic on what he had. So take the cards, move the player's cards out of the way, push the pot with both hands, make sure you clear your hands, then move the button. Now, this is a game that needs to be practiced with. Not everybody's math is good. I highly recommend any student or any dealer that's even been dealing for years that doesn't feel comfortable with pot limit, putting a few math apps on your phone, because the quicker you are coming up with the math, the more respect you're going to get from your table and the more comfortable the WSOP is going to be having you deal those games. A lot of the pot limit players can come up with the pots really quick and you want to beat them to the punch. Why? Because you're a professional.